Take it away, Patrick.
Sounds good. So hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. So we're going to talk about OpenSocial, a standard for the social web. So first, a little bit of an introduction. Then Chris is going to explain how to build OpenSocial applications. Then Kevin is going to talk about OpenSocial containers, which in the OpenSocial lingo means the social site where your application is running. And then how to become an OpenSocial container using the Apache Shindig project. And then we'll do a brief summary. The goal of this session is to give you a broad overview of what OpenSocial is about and what you can do with it. So the goal of OpenSocial is to make the web better by making it social. But first, we need to address the question about what social means. Everybody's got their own definition of what social means. It's a very polysemic term. And when there's a complex term like this, I find it really useful to go ask kids what they think about it, because usually they go straight to the heart of the matter. So in this case, I asked my daughter, Elliot, what do you do with your friends? And she's drawing pretty well, and she came up with these. So we look at each other. There are lots of pictures up there. We're talking. Communication is a big theme for social. We're laughing. All these fun apps when you're throwing sheep at each other. We help each other. Collaboration is a big theme as well. We read together, sharing reading lists or items. And we do projects together, collaboration again. All these are activities that are offline today and that are moving to the web. There's another aspect to social, which is represented by this plush toy called Raoul here, and my other daughter, Charlotte, is giving him something to eat. Raoul is a little toy that they take home, the kids in her classroom take home every weekend, and with the parents, we do some fun stuff together, we take some pictures, and then they take the picture back in the classroom, and they socialize around it. So Raoul is what sociologists call a social object. And if you think about it, there are lots of objects around which we socialize together. Which leads us to this guy here who's socializing with Kevin on his cell phone. His name is Jerry Engstrom, and he's a sociologist by training. He's also the founder of a startup called Jaiku, who's doing a mobile social network. And his company has been acquired by Google. And so he's part of the social team at Google right now. And a few years ago, he gave a very interesting talk about how to build a successful social network. And he issued 5 rules. The first one is you need to determine what is the object you're trying to socialize. If you take an example, Flickr, try to socialize pictures. SlideShare is socializing slides. The next question you need to ask yourself is what are the verbs that you can act upon these objects. So for example, on eBay, it's buy and sell. On Flickr, it's upload and tag, and, or invite other people. So these verbs should be very prominent in the UI when you're designing your user interface for your social network. Then how can people share these objects? Each object needs to have a unique URL. Flickr wasn't successful until they started to have a unique URL per photo, and then people could really share them. Point 4 is very important. What is the gift in the invitation? I'm pretty sure many of you received one of these emails. Please click on this link and fill this 4 pages form because I have some trouble synchronizing my address book. Usually I just click on spam. There's no gift for me in there. So when you're building a social application, think about the gift that is in there for the user who receives it. And then the business model, who you're charging. 5 years ago, it was very easy to create a whole new social network to socialize one object like Flickr did. But today, many people are just managing their list of friends, what we call the social graph, in one or more social networks. Who among you are part of at least one social network? Yeah, a big majority of the room. And that's pretty classic. So we are 5 years later. Now there are at least 100 social networks out there, and people manage their relationships there. So the way to socialize objects without having to recreate a whole registration system and a social network is through what we call APIs, application programming interfaces. So here we have a developer who wants to socialize an object or to create a social application. And he's using the APIs of a social network here in the example LinkedIn to get access to the list of friends of his users, their profile information, and what we call the activity stream. The activity stream is a place where you push all your updates. All the interesting things you're doing on the web are pushed there, and then your friends can take a look at it. So this site, LinkedIn, is a social network. It exposes these APIs, and our developer is happy he can build his application that runs in LinkedIn. The problem is we have 100 social networks out there, and if each of them had a different API, there's no way every developer who wants to socialize one object or one activity is going to use all these APIs and develop their application for all these. And if you think about it, it really looks like what creating a network application was before the web existed in 1992. For those of you who remember, there were tons of protocols like Wise, Gopher, FTP, and there weren't that many applications taking advantage of these. And then in 1993, Tim Berners-Lee created HTTP and HTML, and we saw an explosion in the number of applications. And that's what we think we need in this case for the social web. Which leads us to this guy. His name is Hal Varian, and I really highly recommend this book, Information Rules. It talks about, it's an economy book. Hal Varian is the chief economist at Google. And the book is 10 years old, and he talks about network effects, lock-in and switching costs, and standards, when to create a standard or how to wage a standard war. And OpenSocial is a straight application of his chapter 8, which is assembling a coalition and creating a standard. And the quote I like in his book is that standards change competition for a market to competition within a market. With OpenSocial, what we're trying to create is a market for social applications. So OpenSocial is a common set of API that allows you to create an application that works on many different social sites. It's open, as its name implies. 2 months ago, Yahoo, MySpace, and Google associated together to create the OpenSocial Foundation that will hold all the intellectual property for the standard for OpenSocial and the gadget specification. And the goal of the foundation is to keep the specification open. The specification itself will be discussed using the open source community process, where the spec is discussed between technical people in a public mailing list. And that happens already. If you're interested in OpenSocial, just go to the Google group Gadget and OpenSocial spec, and you'll see that there are lively discussions about the next revs of the spec, which is 0.8 and the REST API. So with OpenSocial, the idea is that you write your application, you learn the programming model once, and then you write your application. 80% of the code should be common to all the containers, and then maybe you have 20% of the code that will be different per container, because some of them add new features or add information to the profile. There are many people involved in OpenSocial. Here's a list of OpenSocial containers. So you can see that Yahoo joined recently. There's MySpace, Netlog, Hi5, Orkut. The two interesting aspects in this slide is that when you look at these social networks, first, geographically, it's very diverse. And the second aspect is that the types of sites are very different. So you have the mainstream social network that you hear about in the press when they're talking about social software. But you also have professional networks like LinkedIn, Viadeo, or Xing. You have dating sites like Engage, where the business model may be a little bit different. And you also have some enterprise players like Oracle and Salesforce who are applying OpenSocial in the enterprise in CRM systems. OpenSocial is standards-based. It's HTML and JavaScript. Now there's a new REST API that's coming up, and it's based on OAuth for authentication. So why should you care? For developers, it's all about distribution. There's 275 million users available today for your application if you're using OpenSocial, and more are coming online as more social sites implement OpenSocial. If you're a social site, you just get a lot of features that are made by external developers, and there's no way that your team is going to create all these by themselves. And then for users, there's more opportunity to socialize on the web and get more applications. So my daughter added these drawings, and I think they are very relevant. But when we are mad, it never finishes well. So we stop fighting. Anyone can be friends. OpenSocial is really open to everybody, and I really do hope that all the players in the industry will end up joining. So now Chris is going to talk about how to build an OpenSocial application.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So I see that we've got a full house. There are a few seats up here available that you might want to investigate here. Anyway, let me jump into my presentation. So Patrick talked about high-level stuff, why it's important that you can reach millions, hundreds of millions of users. I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about actual coding. Since this is a developer conference, let's show some code, right? So first of all, if you want to build an actual OpenSocial application, you're going to be working, as Patrick said, with standard technologies. Typically, like, you can build applications using HTML, JavaScript, and any other number of things like CSS and so forth. And then, of course, these new REST services actually simplify things a bit as well. So you don't even have to program entirely in JavaScript. You can program your applications to be like server to server, so initiating REST or HTTP calls to an OpenSocial server and processing the data coming back, whether it's in Atom or JSON format. So if you look at the OpenSocial JavaScript API, this is the API that was created early, when we first launched. It's typically broken down in 3 areas. One is for people and friends, so how to access friends' information programmatically. Second is activities, so how you can share what your friends are up to or see what your friends are doing. And then there's persistence. And this is actually a cool feature of OpenSocial in that you don't always have to go out to a third-party server to store data. So in this case, you can store like certain amounts of data, share it with your friends, and so forth. And so this is actually, it's up to the container. The container is what we refer to as a site that's serving OpenSocial applications. So it's up to the container, such as Orchid, Hi5, and so forth, to actually define the limits by which how much data you can store. So let's take a look at some code. I'm not going to go into every detail, but what we're looking at is essentially a JavaScript function that you can embed in a gadget, and this gadget could be running on an OpenSocial container. In this case, we want to get friend data, and we're going to go through and create, it's done in an asynchronous transactional manner. So I'm going to set up a request. I want to request who the viewer is of this application so I can display their name. And I want to also check who the viewer's friends are. So when the application renders within a gadget, within like a social networking site, we'll have both the viewer's name as well as the viewer friends displayed within an iframe, literally as it is an iframe. Now you notice that at the bottom, just as we're, my laser's not powerful enough, just as we're sending off the request, I'm also establishing a callback function. So the callback function in this case for me is onLoadFriend. So that means I don't have to block or wait for the server to respond. I can go on and do other things. But then once the response does come back, I invoke, or essentially onLoadFriends is invoked for me. So this is typically how you build applications. You set up your requests, fire off the requests, and then you have some callback functions that then are invoked, and you can process the data in whatever manner you see fit. Here, as you can see in onLoadFriends, this is a function that will go through, extract the viewer data and the viewer friends data, and then I'm just using typical AJAX like DHTML to display the data. And this is like a very simple hello world example where I'm just iterating through the collection of viewer friends and displaying it in an unordered list. Posting an activity. So as I said before, you can share where you're up to or let your friends see what you're doing. This is a bit of code that you can actually create a new activity, send off the request, and have the container then display it in whatever manner it sees fit. So for example, if you're familiar with Orchid, Orchid has this updates mechanism where you can see updates from you or your friends. So if you build an OpenSocial application that goes through, creates this activity, in this case, it's actually a function here that I've created where I pass in some text, and then it will create the activity, establish a priority, and then send the text off in the parameters. And then I also have a callback. Now in this case, the API just has a callback just to let me know that the response or the request was received successfully. But it's up to the container to actually display the data. Okay? Persisting data. So this is the cool feature where you can actually, instead of having to go out and make a request to a third-party server, which you can totally do in gadgets, here I can just use the API itself to store something locally. So in this example, I can create just 2 data objects or any number of data objects. And the way it works is it's like an asynchronous hash map system where I set up a request, I define my data objects here, like in this case, just some random numbers, and then I set up like a new update person app data request, give it a key, and then I have like a callback function to request my data to let me know that I successfully posted the data to my server. And now I say, okay, now I posted my data, let's go ahead and retrieve it. So I'm going to go ahead and fetch the persisted data. And so this is a little bit of code that shows you, okay, these are the 2 fields, these are the 2 keys in my hash map that I have on the server somewhere. I want to go ahead and set up my data request to request the persisted data so far. So, and then yet I have another callback function called handle return data, where that would be invoked when the request to pull down the data is successfully completed. So in this case, I have some viewer or viewer data coming back, and then I have the actual keys, app field 1, app field 2, and then I can retrieve that data and then display it. So in a nutshell, that's essentially how you work with the data API, which is like one of the 3 main areas of the OpenSocial API. So let me also show you some code, or kind of just to get a feel for what we're talking about. So I'm going to switch over to a browser here. I have a couple things set up. So what we're looking at right now is, I happen to have my own server running, and I've posted these XML files. And these are the same examples that I showed you before. So if I click on this XML file, this is the raw source of an actual OpenSocial application that displays friends. So in this case, I'll expand it, but it's essentially the same code I showed you before. So this raw XML file can then be registered with an OpenSocial container. And each container or OpenSocial site has their own mechanism by which you can register. Typically, you have sandboxes where you can set the URL and load it in, or you can also have it posted into like an application gallery, and then the people managing that site can then go through a process by which you get voted up to have your application hosted. So in this case, if I want to see this application in my environment, I can switch over to my sandbox environment, which is right over here, and I actually have this app loaded up. Or I can even show you my sandbox environment here, where I have a list of all the apps installed. And if I want to see my simple list friends example, there it is. And that's actually doing the request. It goes out, fetches my viewer friends and my viewer, which is me at this case, and displays it using some dynamic HTML. So that's a very simple example. Of course, you're not going to necessarily just build these dumb examples. You want to see something flashy or get people's attention. So in that case, there's a very popular application built by a friend of mine, Lalit, who's actually we reached out to a few months ago in India, and they have a very fun game called PhotoBuzz. Or it's somewhat of a game, somewhat of just a simple little thing. And of course, this uses like all of the latest technologies with Flash and building like nice UI. So if I want to pick like some type of an animation, so in this case, say hello, I can then scroll down and send like this hello message out to any one of my friends. And so let's see, I can say hello to Patrick. So hey, Patrick. Bonjour.
I'm not logged in.
What's that? What's that? Okay. So I've sent this request to do it. So what I'm actually doing is interacting with this rich UI in this application. It's actually going out to it's a service based on the company. It has like a third-party server which manages all the requests coming in. And then the request goes out and is sent. And on the receiving end, you can see I've received various ones over the time, and some of my friends or whatever, they just send these little things that pop up. So this is a simple example. Like OpenSocial applications are not just like unordered lists. They can be actually fairly rich and stuff like that. I also want to show you very quickly before jumping back. Same application in High5. They operate in the same manner. So it's no big deal. I can go ahead and do that and say hello to my friends in my High5 account as well. All right, so let me go ahead and hit stop before the thing takes control of my presentation. Okay, so I'll hand it. Oh, I got a few more things, then I'll hand it over to Kevin. Now, I showed you JavaScript, how you can work with the JavaScript APIs for interacting with people, data, activities, so forth. There's a whole new, really cool set of services coming online as we speak, literally being checked into the Shindig code base, and that's known as the REST services. So as you can see here, instead of writing JavaScript code, you could actually have a server-side bit of code, which could be Java or any type of server-side language, and all you have to do is make HTTP requests. In this case, if I want to see people for a particular global user ID and I want to see all the people connected, I just use that URL and issue the request, and it will come streaming back in either JSON or Atom format. And likewise, I can see friends, the specific friends, or I can see the profile information for, just for myself in this case. And likewise, for activities, I can see my activities or my friends' activities just by using the URL patterns as we see there. Oops, I jumped ahead. Application data, I can fetch and store application data in a similar manner just by defining it within the URL. And then some additional query parameters as well. So you can tell it what format, if you want JSON or Atom, you can specify that. Fields, what specific fields you want to pull out as opposed to the entire thing. And then some paging parameters such as start page, count, and so forth. So some pretty cool stuff there. And let me just show you really quickly a demonstration of the REST services. And this is like very easy because I have the REST services running live on my own server. This was I showed also last, like 2 weeks ago at Java 1. I'm actually executing a request to my server, and it comes back in Atom in XML. So that's the raw data that's coming back. And I showed at Java 1 a Java Server Faces application interacting with this data in a simple demo. But I'll hold off on that one for now. So, alrighty. Now, just to finish up before handing over to Kevin, of course you can build your applications in JavaScript, but typically you'll want to use like a third-party site to manage, like, especially if you get a really high hit rates, you want to have like a nice database to store transient data and so forth. So what are your options? Well, you can use services like Amazon EC2. Joyent has this accelerator program for both Facebook and OpenSocial. And then there's also Google App Engine. And actually, that's a really cool technology, so there's definitely content here at Google I/O. I definitely invite you to check it out. But it's basically everything that you need to build web applications. So you can use that as your backend or third-party home-based storage area for an OpenSocial application. So I definitely recommend checking out Lane Leah-Broughton's OpenSocial App Engine integration article, which explains how to integrate the two technologies, as well as checking out the Google I/O code lab that we have here this week that you can actually play around with the technology and building an OpenSocial application. And finally, I'll just touch on real quickly, if you want to read up on the specification or participate in the discussion with how the specs are evolving, I definitely recommend going to those groups. And then if you want to see code samples, documentation, and so forth, code.google.com/OpenSocial. And then as well, there's like another Google Code project, OpenSocial-resources. So I definitely recommend checking those out. And of course, to get access to sandboxes, there's a number of URLs there that you can get registered and get up and playing with your own accounts or your own systems. All right, so let me hand it over to Kevin.
Thank you.
He's going to talk about OpenSocial containers.
So,
hold off. We got a time. We got to keep going.
Chris was talking about applications that you write yourself. Those end up being hosted in containers. And I want to go into a bit more detail about what containers actually consist of. The point of OpenSocial is to separate the application logic from the social context. So your application makes these viewer requests and viewer friends requests and gets the information that relates to the context it's running in. All the app sees is a bunch of user IDs, but it's the container that's providing the social context for the users to make them into people so that the user can understand their relationship with these people and make sense of it with that. Users are familiar with the social network sites. You pretty much all said you're members of these. When you join those sites, you have an understanding of the social contract you have with that container and how you expect it to behave, what data you've stored with it, and so on. And it's the container's job to maintain that and enforce that for the applications that run within that container. A key value here for the applications and the users is to save both of them from re-registration hell, where you have over and over again have to enter, yes, this is me, here's my picture, here are my friends, to one application after another. And the pain of that prevents you from using a lot of applications. So being able to reuse this existing context opens up the doorway to lots of applications that otherwise would have been too hard to get enough people involved to use them. Another thing to think about here is that containers don't choose their users. The big list of containers that Patrick showed there, you probably had heard of 5 of them because the others are out in a space that you don't interact with. What happens is the containers set up a social model that makes sense to them, and the users find them and tell their friends, and it spreads out that way. And they grow through homophily, which means birds of a feather flock together in Greek or something. Basically, you like people who are like you. You go to a site. If the people there are like you in whatever dimension you're looking at, you'll want to use that site. And so there's this sort of network effect of feedback of you get invited to a site by somebody you know, you will spread out that way. Or they grow by affinity, which means they're focused around a shared interest that you can associate with people from around the world through. There's a map there that's a little bit too small to see, but that's kind of deliberate because I think its premise is slightly wrong because it purports to show which social network won which country. And actually that's more of an artifact of how the affinities and homophily spread the networks. The networks gain users, their users tell their friends, they spread out through friendship groups. So there's these big overlapping sort of clouds of friendship groups that define the container. But what happens is as those spread, they bump into natural boundaries, they bump into linguistic boundaries or national boundaries, and so the container ends up filling up one country or another. And all the containers, which you'll be able to meet in the next session, can tell you stories of, yes, we suddenly got all these users in the country we didn't realize. The classic example is Orkut in Brazil, but it's the same is true for LiveJournal in Russia or Friendster in Singapore and so on. All of these sites say, yes, we took off somewhere, and then we had to localize for that language. Somehow the sites take off ahead of the developers. So the value of OpenSocial is it gets you out to all these users of all these containers. You can write your application and then send it out in the web and let it find the people who want to use it. You don't have to pick one of these sites to specialize for. Your app can be out there running on a site you may not have heard of. You get to spread through all these friend groups, not just the ones that belong to a particular site. And you will end up being surprised where your users are too. You'll find, oh, I've suddenly got all these users in Hong Kong. Where did that come from? So one thing to bear in mind is make sure you plan to localize your application. There's a bunch of details on how to do that in OpenSocial, which there isn't time to go into here, but it is designed for localization, and there are some great tools to help you do that. The other thing to think about is the containers aren't just social network sites. I know most of the examples we've been showing so far have been, but there's a whole bunch of different kinds of sites that it makes sense to contain applications within. There are the social network sites. There are sites that are like personal dashboards, like iGoogle or the My Yahoo homepage. There are sites that are built around a social object that Patrick was referring to, sites like Flickr or YouTube, where there are objects being shared that are social. There are even corporate CRM systems which aren't social at first regard, but actually have a lot of data about human interactions and people there. And we believe that this can actually spread to any website. The point of this is to make the web social, to make social something that you can just make a call and get a social context for your application in the same way that you can use any other feature of the web. So in order to cover all these different kinds of containers, we have a couple of abstractions. Chris was talking about the viewer and the viewer's friends, but there's also the idea of the owner and the owner's friends. So the viewer and viewer friends was what Chris was showing. The person looking at the page you're on is the viewer. Their friends are the people that they know and they're sort of carrying with them to that side. But the owner is a bit different. The owner is the person who owns the page you're on. In a social network site, this is the most common example here is a profile page. You set up a profile page as a kind of public performance to say who you are to the web or to the group of people in that site. And so you own that page. You decide what apps are running on it and embedded in it. So the app can ask about the viewer and the owner. Exactly what this means is defined by the container. Because the container has defined the social contract and the social context of the site, how that maps to the user's perception of it is defined by the container you're running in. Broadly, your app doesn't need to worry about this. You just have the idea of viewer and owner, and you'll get a context that makes sense to the person using that application where you're running it. Your app just gets user IDs and connections to other IDs, and you can then draw, you can get photos and names to associate with them to build the user experience. But the main thing is you've got a bunch of IDs that map to friendships in this way. The other thing to think about is the owner may not be a person. It could be an organization, if you think about the CRM example. It could be a social object. If you think about Flickr, the owner of a page is kind of the photograph, and the friends of that photograph might be the people who favorited it. You can think about other mappings like that. But to your app, these abstractions should be what work. So let's go through the different kinds of container that I've talked about and see how these mappings work in those. For a social network site, you have two main kinds of pages. You have profile pages, which are these public performance pages you're showing to the world. There, the owner is the profile page owner, and the viewer, it might not be known. You might not actually know who the viewer is if it's a public site like much of MySpace. You can go and browse the pages without actually being logged in and it knowing who you are. The viewer may be the owner. You look at your own page quite a lot. Or it may be another member of the site if the site knows who you are. So you get those abstractions there. On the home page of the site, the owner would be the viewer. If you've embedded an application on your home page on the site, then the owner and the viewer will be the same thing because you have to be logged in to see those. So these are the sort of classic examples of social networking sites that we've discussed, MySpace, High5, and Orkut being the large OpenSocial containers there. Another kind of container is a personal dashboard, which is very like the home page in the social networking side. The owner is the viewer. Again, you have to be logged in to do this to embed your applications in there. Anonymity doesn't really make sense there. Friends might not be defined in this context. There are sites that don't necessarily have friends. iGoogle, as it's set up in the sandbox, doesn't give you friends by default. You have to add some. So as the viewer stroke owner, you will have no friends until you create some, which you can draw on other sources for. So iGoogle is an example of this. Yahoo would be an example of this too. Then we talked about social object sites, sites that are focused around particular shared context, shared experiences, sites like Flickr. Here the page tends to reflect the object. There may be personal pages too, but often the page reflects the object. It could be a movie, a picture, a product, something like that. The owner then is the object, and the owner friends are people who are connected to that object, which could be the creators of it, it could be fans of that object. The sense will make sense, the sense will belong to the container in effect. And the viewer, again, is the person looking at it. The viewer friends are probably people you may want to share the object with and so on. The iMeme container is a bit like this. Its social object is music, and this is a big opportunity for sites like Flickr and YouTube to adopt this stuff. And then the CRM systems, there the pages tend to reflect the customer. So the owner of the page would be the customer you're serving or trying to sell to or whatever. And the owner friends would be the people connected to that customer within the database, which could be other customers, it could be your colleagues. And then the viewer is you, the user of the system, and the viewer friends would be your colleagues or possibly other customers. So examples, this is the mapping that Oracle CRM and Salesforce are building. And finally, the final kind is any website. Here, the owner is the site, and then the owner friends are the users of the site, the people who've logged into that site and said, yes, I have a connection with this site. And the viewer, again, is you looking at it, and your friends are, the viewer friends are the people who've logged into that site that are already your friends. And the example here is Google Friend Connect, which you may have seen the launch of recently. The goal there is to add a little bit of JavaScript to any website and enable this interaction through a collection of open standards. The point of the container sites is that they are controlling the policy. They have the social contract with the user, so they will affect what your application can do within that environment. So there's a series of APIs to help you deal with this. There's an environment object you can check to find out properties of that particular container. You should use that rather than doing a am I on this site, am I on that site type decision. Getting information, again, viewer information might not be available, or it might be hidden from you because for privacy concerns. There is a request permission API that you can call if the viewer information is hidden, and then the site can either prompt the user for that or make a choice about whether you get to do the permission. It could allow all, it could deny all, but there's a way to do that. So you can write an app that doesn't ask for viewer information until a certain point when you might need it to install the application. This lets you do sort of graceful installation of your application. There are APIs for spreading your application. The activities that both the other guys talked about, the display of those is under the container control. You may or may not see those, depending on what the container decides to do with them. There are these request send message and request share app APIs that let you ask to communicate with other users or ask another user to install the application. Again, you're making a request to the container. It's deciding the policy on behalf of the users of what should happen there. And the other decisions that the containers have are over monetization and installation of the applications. They have different policies on can you run ads in your applications, or can you have other monetization policies, or they may have an extension that helps you monetize directly. And also they have control over what apps can be installed. The containers are, are guardians of their users. They want to make sure they don't let malicious applications in. So some have whitelists, some have blacklists, some have preferred applications and so on. That will vary from container to container, so look into that. There's 2 more sessions that go into more detail on this stuff. There's Meet the Containers, which follows this session immediately afterwards, where we have a large number of the containers to come here and tell you about them and talk about the stuff. And there's a session tomorrow afternoon called Best Practices for Spreading Your Application, where we go into more detail about these ways of propagating your applications within the social networks. Oh, skip that one. Now hand back to Chris on becoming an OpenSocial container.
Cool. Thank you, Kevin. How are we doing on time? Cool. So anyway, I have a few more slides. I'm going to be talking about a little bit more of the technical aspects on the container side. So earlier I talked about coding from a client development standpoint, but this is for folks who are like server-side developers who want to actually interact with, say, Java, PHP, or essentially server-side code to become your own OpenSocial container. So in this case, how do you become an OpenSocial container? Well, you can write code that it follows the spec and pretty much do it independently, but one thing that we're definitely recommending is that you utilize existing open source container code known as Shindig, Apache Shindig. This is actually an incubator project that's essentially managed by the Apache Foundation, and Google is working with a number of partners in implementing this technology. So it got started towards the end of last year. We had some real key people that helped kick this project into drive, such as Ning, High5, and so forth. We got some great contributors out there that are not working for Google, but they're just excellent people working on the technology and providing just, continuing to help evolve this technology. So it's essentially serving as an open source reference implementation for how you can host OpenSocial applications. So in short, what is its goal? Well, to allow you to be able to start hosting OpenSocial applications in, within and under an hour's worth of work. Okay? I mean, you could literally host an OpenSocial app in minutes, but to integrate it into your backend system, if you have a fairly complex system, it would take a little bit longer. So the first thing I'd want you to make sure you understand is that this is the Apache Shindig website. It's incubatораpache.org/Shindig. So I'm actually going to step over and show you some of the features within this website on how to get familiar with the technology, and then also how to check it out and play with it and build your own versions of it. All right, so let's jump over to a demo real quickly. And as I said, I'm going to show you the website. So that's the website, incubatораpache.org, and it explains what it is and how it kind of fits into the big picture. Now, we don't have our automated downloads set up yet, but what you can do is actually check out using Subversion, you can check out the code onto your own environment. You can check out the entire code bundle, and currently today, this is a very important point, is that Shindig it's meant to be language neutral, meaning like it's not just for Java developers, it's not just for PHP, but we're looking to have continuing partners join up in the Shindig development process to, for example, create a C# or what have you, Python, different flavors of Shindig. So in this case, you can see all the information of how you can get up to speed with Shindig, as well as you can get information on how to contribute. So you can actually become a member of Shindig and contribute patches and so forth. And then there's also information of how you can get support or take part in the discussions within the development of Shindig. So there's actually Shindig-dev is the mailing list that you can subscribe to. So let me switch over, and I'm going to pull up a window here that shows you. So for example, I pulled down Shindig just yesterday, and this is what it looks like on my environment. I have, there's my Java directory. Under there contains all the Java code for the Java version of Shindig. And you'll also notice here I have PHP. That's the equivalent PHP version of Shindig. And then there's some common stuff like JavaScript. There's some examples in code that can work in either environments, and that when you issue a build, you can actually pull these things into your package environment. Again, I should say the build is actually for the Java, whereas the PHP flavor, you just put it on your server and it will just work. So if I wanted to build this code at a top level, I could just type the command mvn, which is the Maven command, and we already have all set up, so it will just kick off the build process and set you up and have all the packaged code ready to run. Now, if I want to run it locally, we also provide a Jetty server. Again, I'm speaking about the Java version. A Jetty server is essentially a small Java EE server that allows you to run things. So let me just kick that off. So now I'm going to be running a local version of Shindig, essentially an OpenSocial container, locally. Now, one other thing that I did is that for this particular instance, I customized it, and I made it, instead of talking to a static XML file, which, as you'll see if you experiment, it comes with a basic XML file of state data, like activities and people and so forth. I actually bridged the gap and created a MySQL extension, so it's talking out to a MySQL database. So in this case, I've created like I OR mapped. I used to work at Oracle, so I know about databases and stuff. So I created essentially a set of tables that map to activities and data and so forth. And now whenever I do updates within my container, my little site, it will update the database. And I can go both ways as well with that. So let's go back to a browser. And I have a page here that shows the sample container. So this is what you get out of the box. If you fire up Shindig, you'll get this simple page which allows you to load in a gadget, the URL, and you can have like a basic set of friends already, like John Doe, Jane Doe, things like that. And this, in the middle section, that's just a running gadget. So you can put whatever gadget you want to test it out. Now, my version that I customized, and I actually created it for the Code Lab as well as Java 1, it's very similar, but I wanted to focus on the 3 examples that I showed before. So I call this one Simple Container. So this is my own variation that you'll actually get to play with if you go to the Code Lab tomorrow. In this case, I can play around with the different simple gadgets. So I can hit reinit, and it will go through and query the friends of John Doe. Plus, I also added a few extra characters in there that you can play around with, so Mickey Mouse and stuff like that. Now, if I switch back over here, I can actually check my database table. So if I were to post an activity here, I could watch it as it gets taken care of or gets logged within an activities table that I've defined. So this is all pretty fun stuff, and I had a lot of fun in working on this, and so definitely recommend, if you want to check out more of how to do these kind of things, come to the Code Lab tomorrow, and this is pretty straightforward stuff there. Okay, let me pass it back. There we go. And I'm going to hand it over to Patrick. Patrick actually used to work at Sun, so he's friends with the creator of SocialSite. You want to say a few things about SocialSite?
I'm kind of biased here. So one of the latest exciting stuff that happened with Shindig, first it's the PHP version that was created by Chris Chabot. I think he's in the room. Chris, are you here? Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Cool.
And Bruno Rovagnati from Globant, who contributed a lot to it. And then one more exciting stuff that happened with Shindig last 2 weeks ago at Java 1, Dave Johnson from Sun announced a new project called SocialSite, and it's an open source project by Sun. And the goal of SocialSite is to enable you to create your own social network for any website created in any type of language. And just adding the pieces to Shindig that are missing. So Shindig does the plumbing for the OpenSocial API, marshalling all your data to JSON or to a REST API. What SocialSite does is that it goes the last mile, where it adds a database to actually create and manage a social relationship, plus some UI. And the nice aspect of it is that the UI is built using widgets. So it's very easy, if you look at this architecture slide, to add the SocialSite widget to your website, and then you just host SocialSite maybe on another server or on the same one, and it makes it very easy to create your own social site with any existing website. I can see a lot of interest for that kind of project, especially for enterprise use. And it's very complementary with something that we announced recently, which is called Friend Connect. So in summary, OpenSocial, the goal is to make the web more social. The current version 0.7 is in production today. If you create an OpenSocial application today, you have access to 275 million users, and there are more coming when more containers are coming online. The new stuff that's coming up is the 0.8 version with lots of additions and refinements, and a REST API that will allow a different programming model where instead of moving your application to the social site, you can grab the social graph data and use them on your site. So in order to get started, you can create an account on one of the sandboxes that are available on all these sites and just get started. For SocialSite, if you want to implement OpenSocial, the easy way is to use Shindig, and you start planning for it, and Shindig starts to really, both the Java version and the PHP version start to be really solid. SocialSite is another option that's even easier, and Friend Connect is still even easier. For advertisers, one of the things you can do with OpenSocial is to create brand advertising, and there are companies like RockU or Mentes or Globant that can help you with that. OpenSocial sessions at Google I/O. OpenSocial is one of the really strategic projects at Google. We have 12 sessions here with representatives from all the various application developers or containers. The one that's next, you'll have 12 different social site representatives that will be on stage explaining what they're doing with OpenSocial. We have a bunch of sessions talking about the future of the spec, about Shindig, and also tomorrow we have some code labs about how to get started with Shindig or how to build an OpenSocial application using Google App Engine as your backend. And we'll use EC2 as well, Amazon EC2. So we will have the two versions. Now, do you have any questions? It's great. We have 4 minutes for questions.
Yeah, we have 2 microphones right up here at the front.
So there are microphones here. If you have any question, please come to the microphone.
From technically speaking, yeah. Yeah, I'm going to repeat it in a second. Also, can we make sure we turn on both mics for the questions as well? So the question was, can you actually share data between different containers? And yeah, that's totally possible now, especially with the REST APIs, allowing server-to-server communication. And also, each container itself can define their own protocol by which they can communicate. But in a general sense, yeah, the REST APIs would make that very simple to do.
Right. And Friend Connect is an example of doing that.
Oh, one last thing before we go on with questions. I'm going to publish these slides on SlideShare, and they'll be on my blog this afternoon.
Cool. Oh, just some housekeeping really quickly before people take off. Don't worry, lunch is served all the way till 2, so no rush. Also, they asked us to make sure if you don't have your badge, please pick it up by 2 p.m. today. And then also, please fill out your feedback with nice and happy comments about us. But anyway, that's it.
Your question.
Oh,
is there an open release schedule for Friend Connect by any chance?
Say that again?
Is there an open release schedule for Friend Connect?
It's not scheduled yet, but it is planned. Sign up for the thing or come and contact me if you've got specific things that you want to ask about it.
Okay.
I think we have another question here too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Facebook?
Is that a question?
Yeah.
I'll just put my slide back. Anyone can be friends.
Yeah.
That's right.
They're very welcome to join OpenSocial.
Yeah.
And it should be completely compatible. You know, the viewer owner model and all that stuff should be completely compatible with what they're doing.
There's a question over on the left.
Yes.
Can you repeat the question as well, since the mic is not quite turned on?
So the question is LinkedIn supporting OpenSocial? And I think Brandon Duncan from LinkedIn will be in the next session about Meet the Containers. And they're working on their OpenSocial implementation and recruiting developers for their private beta right now. So if you're interested, you should send an email to developers@linkedin.com. Or just try to grab Brandon in next sessions.
If you're to support the OpenSocial APIs as a site, is it a requirement that you open up the social graph data? So, for example,
how could you not? the apps would have no friends.
So for example, if you have and persist that data outside of that site.
Okay, so
that's a hard limit today. For example, with Facebook.
Yeah. So the question is, if you if you implement the OpenSocial API, are you required to let people do whatever they want, developers that access your social graph data with that data? And the answer is no, you're not obliged to anything. You need to let developers access to the social graph data through the API, but the term OpenSocial just defines the technical aspect of sharing this data with them. Now each container, its social site is free to define their own policies about what developers can do with the data, which developers can get into the program and all that. And I expect it will be very different from one social site to another. Like Orkut and Hi5 may have some policies, like many type of applications can get there. LinkedIn, I expect them to have a much narrower set of developers that they let in. And Salesforce.com and Oracle even more narrow.
Okay.
Is it better to reserve specific technical questions for a different session on the APIs themselves?
Sorry?
So we're finishing up anyway, so feel free to come on up to the front there if you ask questions.
Or come to the code lab.
And we have the sessions as well, and the code lab as well. You're welcome to ask technical questions there too. So, okay, shall we wrap it up? We can take your question down here,
Yeah.
if that's okay.
What kind of enterprise adoption are you seeing? You mentioned Salesforce and Oracle and what they're doing, but consumer versus enterprise and companies' ability to adopt OpenSocial, what are you seeing there?
So the question is, what do we see in terms of enterprise adoption? And I think for enterprise adoption, we're just at the beginning, where Salesforce has been prototyping OpenSocial. Oracle, they're working on their solution. And something like Project SocialSite by Sun, I think really shows where this is going.
We have a number of other enterprise partners that we haven't officially named yet, but we've been working with them to come up with a correct solution. So we should probably wrap it up and thank everyone for attending our session.
Yeah,
we're here
for
questions afterwards. Thanks a lot.
We'll stay here.
Feel free to hang out if you have some more questions. Thank you.